You know, when I say don't be afraid, you know what I really mean. Don't even be afraid to die. I submit to you tonight. No man is free if he fears death. But the minute you conquer the fear of death at that moment, you are free. So many times I'm immune to it. We've got some difficult days ahead. Some began to talk about the threats that were out, or what would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers. Well, I don't know what will happen now, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
The next day, April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. From 1955 to 1968, Martin Luther King led a peaceful 20th century American revolution. In the short span of 13 years, the non-violent civil rights movement which he headed changed the face of American society. It united black people in organized, non-violent protest which exposed the evils of white racism. Segregation, which had been a way of life for large parts of the nation, was practically eliminated. Full freedom was not won, but more was accomplished in those 13 years than the previous 100, including the enactment of federal legislation to protect the rights of black citizens.
Wherever, by clear and objective standards, states and counties are using regulations, or laws, or tests to deny the right to vote, then they will be struck down.
Martin Luther King's leadership of this march toward freedom began in December 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, in the heart of the Deep South. He was only 26 years old, a recently ordained Baptist minister who had been asked to lead a boycott of the city buses to protest segregated seating and mistreatment of black passengers.
Are you ready for the question? All in favor, let it be known by standing on your feet. That was the day that we started a bus protest which literally electrified the nation. And that was the day when we decided that we were not going to take segregated buses any longer. And you know, when we planned the bus boycott, we said if we could just get about 50 or 60% of the Negroes of Montgomery not to ride buses, this would be an effective boycott. I think that whole day we found 8 Negroes on the bus. And from that day on, that boycott was more than 99 9/10% effective. We have a legitimate protest, and we feel also that one of the great glories of American democracy is that we have the right to protest for rights. We will do it in an orderly fashion. This is a non-violent protest. We are depending on moral and spiritual forces, using the method of passive resistance. I, for one, under God, will die before I'll yield 1 inch to that kind of movement.
The die-hard segregationists and hooded hoodlums of the Ku Klux Klan reacted more and more violently, but the boycott was not broken. Murder, bombing, the jailing of Dr. King, none of these actions succeeded in weakening the determination of the black people of Montgomery.
We still advocate nonviolence and passive resistance and still determined to use the weapon of love.
Are you going to rise this up again?
No.
For 13 months, people continued to walk and ride in carpools. Never before had a black community in the South banded together like this. Meanwhile, the legal aspects of the case were being argued in the courts, ultimately all the way to the Supreme Court.
This morning, the long-awaited mandate from the United States Supreme Court concerning bus segregation came to Montgomery.
I hereby defy a ruling handed down by the United States Supreme Court, ordering desegregation of public carriage.
This mandate expresses in terms that are crystal clear that segregation in public transportation is both legally and sociologically invalid.
As long as I am president of the Alabama Public Service Commission, I am going to see that our segregation laws are upheld.
He neither could nor did, and the year-old boycott was called off. It is a great victory for the young minister and for the method of nonviolence. It is also the beginning of the civil rights movement in the South and led a few years later to the sit-ins and freedom rides of the early 1960s. Using nonviolent direct action, mixed groups of whites and blacks, mostly students, challenged segregation on interstate buses and places of public accommodation throughout the South. The sit-ins and freedom rides were a new version of an old and respected American tradition, the right to protest for right, and resulted in the first attempts at federal civil rights legislation. The next target of the civil rights movement was Birmingham, Alabama, in 1963, the most segregated city in the nation, and for blacks, a place to die if you tried to be a person.
I will not rest until we are able to make this kind of witness in this city so that the power structure downtown will have to say, we can't stop this movement, and the only way to deal with it is to give these people what we owe them and what their God-given rights and their constitutional rights demand.
Nonviolent direct action meant a willingness to go to jail for one's beliefs in order to reveal to others the difficulties of obtaining justice. By committing acts of civil disobedience, the nonviolent protesters forced the authorities to arrest them. In Birmingham, in the spring of 1963, the jails were literally filled by these methods. This, according to Dr. King, marked the non-violent movement coming of age. The arrests made headlines across the country and were televised around the world.
You can never whip these boys if you don't keep you and them separate. You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
Birmingham's police commissioner, Bull Connor, put nonviolent resistance to its severest test with his brutal treatment of the demonstrators. The sickness and ugliness of racism was exposed to the entire nation and to the rest of the world as well by newspaper and television reports of his use of police dogs and high-pressure fire hoses.
We must say to our white brothers all over the South who will try to keep us down, we will meet your physical force with soul force. We will not hate you, and yet we cannot in all good conscience obey your evil laws. But we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. In winning the victory, we will not only wear our freedom, we will so appeal to your heart and your conscience that we will win you in the process.
marked another victory in the campaign to break down social segregation in the South. But equally important, it aroused the conscience of much of white America and brought recognition and support for the accomplishments of Dr. King and his nonviolent movement from people throughout the world.
I have the great honor on behalf of the Nobel Committee to hand over to you the insignia of the Nobel Peace Prize.
Martin Luther King was one of the earliest public figures to oppose United States participation in the Vietnam War. His outspoken efforts for the withdrawal of American forces often made him the target of furious criticism, even by other civil rights leaders. It was a difficult time for the man who had been called the moral leader of his generation.
For those who say to me, stick to civil rights, I have another answer. That is that I've fought too long and too hard now against segregated public accommodation to end up segregating my moral concern. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Economic injustice was another kind of injustice. Before his death, Dr. King had begun to build a coalition of the underprivileged of various ethnic groups, the Poor People's Campaign, to fight for economic equality.
It is my hope that power for poor people will really mean having the ability and the aggressiveness to make the power structure of this nation say yes when they may be desirous of saying no. We will get together and be together. Black people, Mexican Americans, American Indians, Puerto Ricans, Appalachian whites, all working together to solve the problem of poverty. We're getting ready to demand jobs and income. We're tired of working full-time jobs for part-time income. We are tired of living in run-down, dilapidated, rat-infested shacks and slums. We are tired of our children having to attend overcrowded, inferior schools. And we are tired of our men not being able to be men because they can't find work. 1,300 sanitation workers are on strike, and Memphis is not being fair to them. We've got to march again in order to put the issue where it is supposed to be. We have this illegal, unconstitutional injunction. All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. Because somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights.
We have the right to protest for rights.
The right to protest for rights. Since Montgomery, a constant refrain of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King had always known that the right to protest for right rested on the most basic democratic right of all, the right to vote. As early as May 1957, after the successful conclusion of the Montgomery bus boycott, Dr. King helped to organize the Prayer Pilgrimage for Freedom. Some 37,000 people, mostly church-going blacks, had assembled in Washington to voice their demands for full citizenship. But it was to be 8 more years before the realization of their demands and the passage of federal legislation guaranteeing the right to vote. Until then, black people throughout the South were forcibly prevented from registering and
By
voting.
making them stand in the race, keep them from registering to vote. And we will register to vote because as citizens of these United States, we have the right to do it. You can turn your back on me, but you cannot turn your back upon the idea of justice. You can turn your back now and you can keep the club in your hand, but you cannot beat down justice.
And so in August of 1963, 6 years after the first pilgrimage to Washington, another larger demonstration took place in the nation's capital. People, all kinds of people, aroused by the police dogs and fire hoses of Birmingham, were exercising their right to protest for right. The 1963 March on Washington was the greatest mass demonstration in the history of the nation. And it was Martin Luther King who underscored the urgency of the demands of the more than 200,000 people assembled in front of the Lincoln Memorial with this powerful appeal to the entire nation. America was stirred by the ringing words of Dr. King. But just a few months later, in Selma, Alabama, black people were still segregated and still prevented from registering to vote. Again, non-violent direct action was exposing the evils of racism to the entire world. The right to protest for right took the form of a 50-mile march from Selma to the state capital of Montgomery.
This march intends to keep off the highway. We will be marching on the shoulder of the road and will not in any way be interfering with the pursuit of traffic.
Detrimental to your safety to continue this march, and I'm saying that this is an unlawful assembly. This march will not continue. Troopers here advance toward the group. See that they disperse. Let the nation know, and we must let the world know that it is necessary to protest this threefold evil. Problem of the denial of the right to vote, the police brutality. We continue to face and faced in its most vicious form last Sunday. Then the attempt to block First Amendment privilege. We have the right to walk the highway. We have the right to walk to Montgomery if our feet can get us there. Let us bow in prayer. And straight and black and white people.
And now the eyes of the whole nation and much of the world were focused on the tiny town of Selma, Alabama. To ensure the safety of the marchers, federal troops were called into service by President Lyndon Johnson.
These forces should be adequate to assure the rights of American citizens pursuant to a federal court order to walk peaceably and safely without injury or loss of life from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama.
Pick 'em up and lay 'em down. Right, right. Pick 'em up and lay 'em down. Right, right. Pick 'em up and lay 'em down. Right, right.
I think the greatest victory of this period was not in terms of an external factor or an external development, but it was something internal. The real victory was what this period did to the psyche of the black man. The greatness of this period was that we armed ourselves with dignity and self-respect. Greatness of this period was that we straightened our backs up. And a man can't ride your back unless it's bent. Last Sunday, more than 8,000 of us started on a mighty walk from Selma, Alabama. They told us we wouldn't get here. There were those who said that we would get here only over their dead bodies. Well, all the world today knows that we are here and we are standing before the forces of power in the state of Alabama saying we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around.
Selma marked the turning point in the struggle to secure the ballot. 5 months after the marchers reached Montgomery, the most important civil rights legislation in a century, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, was signed into law. Behold, here cometh the dreamer.
And we no longer have to worry the federal government about our big. I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. We will build our legislative one day. This nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
Let us slay him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams.
I think that we've made tremendous strides toward the realization of Martin's dream. Perhaps the greatest gains that we've made have been in the area of getting the masses of people to realize their potential as citizens of this country by registering and voting. If you get people in office who are going to be responsive to the needs of the individuals that they represent, then they're going to make sure that the resources of our government are used to benefit the people. We are now in the process of conducting a voter registration campaign to educate people to an understanding of that one ballot that each individual possesses. And certainly the Martin Luther King Center will be continuing this until we get the vast potential that is there involved in exercising this very elementary right, because I believe very firmly that we cannot hope to fully achieve our freedom and be full citizens of our society until we exercise fully the right to vote.
Well, we got the vote that we're going to put there.
NBC just declared Hatcher as the winner.
In 1968, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, there were only 1,000 black elected officials in the entire nation. Today, 6 years later, there are more than 3,000. I'm one of them. I'm Andrew Young, Congressman from the 5th Congressional District of Georgia. representing the city of Atlanta. My preparation for politics and my previous experience was somewhat different from that of most of my colleagues, but in a way I did receive a lot of it around any of the county courthouses of the South. In Selma, for instance. And that's me in St. Augustine, Florida. Today I'm in Washington. I'm attempting to do some of the things that would help continue the legacy of Martin Luther King.
Well, and I'm wondering, does the Department of Agriculture have any concerns about helping the price of food at home for the American consumer?
Yes, Mr. Young.
We're still a long way from achieving the dream of Martin Luther King. And it's hard for high school students to realize just how far we've come.
In 1962. You were 6, so it was kind of hard to remember what was going on. Did you ever have any experience of being turned away from anything because you were black?
Not really. I had a military attitude when I was about 10 or 12. I was pregnant. I go in there and I look at this. You know how you go in the store and people say, hey, can I help you? They were white. I said, no, you think I'm still something. I just jumped on it right away. But I think I changed.
Why were you so mean?
It ran through my family. I heard them out say, the white man, I forget you. A white man is, will start that. So I took it. But now I know I'm in the world. And they're all right. They're cool.
I represent a district which is 62% white and 38% black. That's a long way from Montgomery.
But what you find out is that 4 whites and 4 blacks have a lot in common. I mean, my dedication is not just to blacks. My dedication is to anybody in this society that has not had an opportunity to enjoy all of the rights and privileges of the society. And that's what Martin Luther King was about.